300 people here. Maybe a tad bit more, but it's
sold out. It was maximum 300. They had to put screens.
I would like to first thank ABS for sponsoring this event and inviting me to moderate the discussion with such distinguished panelists. To set the stage for today's session, let me highlight some pertinent facts and current projections about the LNG market. Since 2000, the LNG trade has grown 7% annually, from 100 to 290 million tons in 2017. In comparison, oil only grew at 1.5%. LNG is projected to expand by at least 3% per annum until 2030, going from 290 to 425 million tons. The LNG trade has also diversified. In 2000, there were only 10 importing countries and 12 exporters. Today, there are 34 importing countries and 30 plus export countries. There is more volume and increased complexity of trade. And an enormous amount of supply is coming on stream, and much more is being planned, especially from the United States, where around 65 million tons a year of capacity is now either operating or under construction. This represents 22% of the current global market. More than double that amount is in various stages of planning in the United States. And other countries could add another 70 million tons annually by 2030. The LNG fleet now consists of about 600 ships, 500 on the water and 100 on water. In 2000, it was just 100, a six-fold increase in less than 2 decades. Because of this increased volume and the complexity of trade patterns, my colleagues conservatively believe that by 2030, the market will require an additional 120 vessels. And this does not, I repeat, does not include the possible replacement of older and uneconomic ships. Let me point out that today's VLCC fleet in service and on order totals about 850 ships. Will the LNG fleet surpass VLCCs in the coming decades? Unlike the tanker market, where the freight rate is typically less than 5% of the delivered cost of oil, today it's about 3%. LNG shipping accounts for 15 to 25% of the total cost, and that is based on the U.S.-Japan trade. Traditionally, this percentage was even higher, was around 30%. Therefore, shipping is extremely important in the total delivered cost of LNG. And it goes without saying, the seller with the lowest cost will secure the buy. The Panama Canal presents a major uncertainty because of congestion. During this recent first quarter, only 75% of U.S. volumes destined for the Far East transited via the canal. The remainder had to be transported around the Cape. Will transport via the canal become even more susceptible to congestion? Also, there has been continuous infrastructure development, particularly in the advancement of import technology, such as the use of FSRUs. These units have a lower capital cost than onshore conventional terminals and a quicker implementation time. Interestingly, if all the volume, that currently is going through two FSRUs was aggregated, it would be the 4th largest country after Japan, China, and Korea. This sector continues to grow, albeit slowly. Technological improvements have made significant progress over the past decade. The new standard for an LNG ship has been established. It has increased from 145,000 cubic meters to about 174,000. The upper limit allows for compatibility at various ports for short-term trades, as well as passage through the Panama Canal, limited to a 49-meter beam. Propulsion has gone from steam turbine to tri-fuel diesel, electric to MEGI and XDF. Going forward, there may be some additional improvements, but supposedly no game changers are anticipated. As a result of these optimizations, charter has benefited tremendously. For instance, on the U.S. Far East trade, at $70,000 a day, a modern MEGI vessel, as compared to a 147 steam turbine, saves a charterer about $34,000 a day. That's $12 million a year, $250 million over the course of a 20-year period. The definition of a long-term charter seems to have changed from 20 years to 5 to 7, in ship owners having to take a greater residual risk, residual value risk. Yard prices have declined from historical highs to close to $300 million to about $185 million for the latest state-of-the-art vessel. Yard prices appear to be rising slightly, but how high will they go? Since its beginnings, LNG shipping has enjoyed an excellent safety record. As the trade grows and new owners and charterers enter the sector, will this record continue? Will the experience of the ship owner manager really matter to charterers? And will they be willing to pay the price for such expertise? All of these issues will be part of today's discussion, and I am certain we will all benefit from the insights and views of these industry leaders about the future of LNG shipping and what matters most. Thank you, and now there's going to be a safety comment, and then we'll start.
Hello everyone, I'm Michael Fitilis and I'm representing the facilities team. I'm just going to take a minute of your time to take you through a safety brief. So in case of an emergency or if we hear the alarm, please stay calm. Do not use the lifts, so do not follow the route that drove you here. Use the safety signs. There's one on your right-hand side and two on the left, one there, one here. And this will lead you to the park, where the security team will lead you safely outside the facility premises. Furthermore, if you need to use the toilet, it's located on the 7th floor, so please use the lifts and it will take you there. One down. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, almost 2 hours, we're going to talk about LNG shipping and the market, vessel technology and future trends, outlook, the order book rather, and shipyards, quality and technical management, ship finance, public versus private, and lastly, we'll take a look at the future. I ask each panelist to please keep your response to about 90 seconds, a minute and a half, and the screen will indicate it because we have a lot of questions to go through. It would be much appreciated. Let me start off by asking the question that you are all in the traditional sectors, dry cargo, bulk, and in those sectors, it's more or less a gamble. You invest and you wait for market cycles to occur. Do you think the same principle applies to LNG? Why don't we start it off with Mr. Procopiou?
Thank you, Michael. It is a pleasure and honor to be here. And you are organizing always interesting panels and questions. So I'm the wrong person to ask because I started the other way around. I built my first LNG carriers for the spot market, and at that time didn't exist. And I remember that I was anticipating $100,000 a day, which they came, but then 2008 crash of the financial system. But for us, this was a very interesting start, because if we were trying to do it otherwise, it would be a failure. Nobody would have chartered us, because they didn't know us as LNG operators. So we gained great experience by visiting all terminals available in the world. We have made a very big study on compatibility, so our ships were compatible for every possible terminal. So yes, we did it the other way around. Similar as tankers and bulkers on the spot market. This is my history.
Mr. Livanos.
It's a completely different business. It's heading in that direction, Michael. There's no doubt about it. But it's still going through an evolutionary cycle that's tracking the evolution of the commodity. The LNG is a commodity that is becoming much more widely appreciated and used by many people in many different ways. And that ultimately will drive commoditization of the services around it, not the least of which is shipping. For the moment, however, we're still, I believe, in a macro growth trend. And although there will always be hiccups in the road, and we've experienced a number of hiccups in the last 10 years, the general direction will be towards macro growth in the thing. So cyclicality is inevitable, but I don't believe that we have yet reached that point.
Mr. Angelicoussis.
I consider LNG a cyclical industry like all the other industries. It can be a gamble if you treat it the wrong way. If you trade your vessel spot, if you play the market by coming in and out, then it can be a gamble. But if you establish good operations, first-class operations, long-term relationships with charterers, I think it can become a long-term business, which is probably as safe as anything you can see. I feel that for the proper operator, it is not going to be a gamble if he treats it as such.
Thank you. Just to stay with you, Mr. Angelicoussis, but you started, and all of you started in the LNG shipping business before the shale revolution. How has that revolution impacted your thinking about ordering ships speculatively, or are charters still required? Are you more bullish about the situation? Please.
Well, first of all, we have ordered vessels speculatively in the past, but as a rule, I don't think we order vessels so speculatively now. We have a big portfolio of fixed vessels. The sale has the interesting fact that it is destination friendly, and as such, it has a higher multiplier of vessels needed per million ton of transportation. I think for that reason, it is a good commodity for trading, and we have seen it with our own vessels. the way charters demonstrate, and as such, trading is good for ton miles. I think the shale gas revolution in the Gulf has been very beneficial to us.
Mr. Livanos.
It's been quite a ride. It's been a revolutionary change in the way the commodity was sourced and used. And I must admit to you that when we made our initial entry into it, it was around the model that we would see large volumes of gas imported into the U.S. So to a certain degree, all of us here were very lucky that the shale revolution happened, and we found our ships employed doing exactly the opposite of what we thought they were going to be employed to do. We don't like to use the word speculative. We don't believe in speculation, and we don't believe in gambling. That doesn't mean, however, we don't order ships on an uncommitted basis. But whatever we look at on an uncommitted basis, we have to certainly believe that we have a higher chance of finding reliable medium and long-term employment for those ships than we would by just not. So to answer your question, I believe that the shale revolution continues to encourage me that there's growth potential in the sector. I'm not going to change my strategy about making wild gambles and speculation, however.
Mr. Procopiou.
Definitely the shale gas was a game changer. And what is cheap is consumed. The price of gas in the United States is 1/3 of what it costs in Europe. And when we, on the peak after the earthquake in Japan, we have seen the prices close to over $20 per MMBTU, and now the price is below 9. So it is a game changer with the added virtues, the other characteristics of CO2 reduction, almost 30% with no SOxes and NOxes, is the preferred fuel. And in today's relationship between the barrel of oil price per MMBTU and the tanker and the LNG is below 50%. And one very important in favor of the LNG. And one very important point I want to make, in order to substitute 1 VLCC of energy, you need 4 cargoes of 160,000 LNG. So the multiplier is very great, and if we take into account also the ton miles that from United States, it was a real game changer.
Thank you. Chris, we'll get to you later. Recently, rates have started to rise, especially short-term rates, short-term trend. Do you feel that this is the trend for the future? Mr. Angelicoussis, why don't we go to you?
Do I feel this is a trend?
How does it look for the future? You think we've reached...
Okay.
Yeah.
I personally feel the bottom of the market in a cyclical sense was early 16, when we had the bottom of energy prices. At the time it was the lowest rates for LNGs. I think that from there on, every year we see higher rates depending on the season. For example, seasonal rates today are lower than they were in the winter time. But come next winter, I hope rates, I cannot say expect, would be higher than last winter.
Okay. Mr. Livanos.
We're definitely in a short-term tightening cycle, although I do believe that medium and long-term rates will be capped at the economic value they represent in terms of the ability to buy and sell gas in different locations around the world. So I don't see medium and long-term rates developing on a continuous basis on an upward trend, but rather reaching a steady state equation. However, I agree with Mr. Angelicoussis, for the short term we should be seeing some pretty healthy short-term rates.
Mr. Procopiou.
I do believe that the rates today are low, because if you add running cost, amortization and interest, this does not add up. So I do believe that nobody can subsidize somebody else's business, so they have to arrive to levels that are sustainable. I don't believe to extremes. It's a steady business with high capital but low returns.
Well, let me stay with you, Mr. Procopiou. Let's just think about that for a second. The rates need to go up, yes, to get a good return on investment. But now we see charterers using tenders, right? So this tender mechanism, to me, concludes that LNG shipping has basically been commoditized. So in that case, when you have now shorter durations, 5-7-year durations, as we said, long-term charters, and these durations are essentially giving you or placing upon you great residual risk, value risk. Do you feel that it has been commoditized, and how do we get the rates to a level that is satisfactory to you?
First of all, charterers, which usually are the producers, lately there are also traders, but they have put a great emphasis on quality service. Quality service is always paramount, and especially in LNG business with such an immaculate record. So the accounting standards have changed, and the charterer has to put as a liability in their balance sheet all the obligation of a long-term time charter. You can imagine if you multiply $70,000 by 365 days by 25 years, how many billions he has to put as a liability in the balance sheet. This was also a game changer. That's why there are shorter period available. Of course, there is a tremendous risk at the end of the charter. How will be the market, and if technology has surpassed your ship and the ship is not yet amortized, and this is the bigger headache in this field, I believe.
Mr. Livanos.
It's interesting because the tender process, Michael's been with us for a long time. It's not a new process. However, what we do see is that the end users who value the operational efficiencies of the first-class operator, who are able to measure the added value they get from the way a ship is run by one person versus another, tend to find a way to find those ships and pay for them. So we're not going to go away from the tender process, and to a certain degree the tender process is a first step towards commoditization. But the real essence of the end users looking for value are going to be driven inevitably by the combination of the headline freight rate and the value added they get from the superior operations and the flexibility of having a larger group of ships in which they can draw from.
Mr. Angelicoussis.
That's a big question you ask, Michael. Now, lower rates, I'm afraid, are related to the very cheap new building prices we have experienced and lower interest rates. There is nothing to do about that. And with the tender process, a lot of times, here I disagree with my friend Peter, that charterers, even high-quality charterers, use the tender process to bring down rates. Rightly or wrongly, they don't appreciate what it means. Shorter periods is unfortunately something that shouldn't be here, because sales contracts between producers and buyers of the product are usually for 10, 15, maybe 20 years. Reliquefaction plants are not built for 5 to 7 years. Why are we getting 5 to 7 year deals with option periods? We take all the risk for the vessel and basically no return on our capital sometimes. I don't want to say how they achieve that, because we have seen tenders that went wrong for that reason. And both of you and I know the tender I'm talking.
I saw Mr. Livanos shake his head. There's a dispute here.
No dispute. I think we're both saying the same things and fundamentally agree. The tender process can be used as a driver down of entry. My point was that there are opportunities, I believe, with the right fleet profiles, the right operational excellence, to gain some recognition for that value with certain operators. It isn't an easy thing to do. Certainly not an easy thing to do, but it is the reason. It is the reason why one should continue to strive for high operational excellence, a differentiator.
Mr. Procopiou has
I want to add that innovation and specialization pays a lot, and because of that and our specialization in ice-bound trades, we are able to secure 29 years employment in this market and with very good return. So always innovation and specialization will be there, but at the same time, as more and more companies are entering in the LNG sector, the competition is fierce, and from the owner's point of view, they do their utmost to pass the enter barrier. And we have seen recently that quality was not of any importance, and was the price. This gave a very wrong signal to the market, and it was a great disappointment. But this is how it is. And on the other hand, competition is synonymous with progress. Without competition, we don't have progress. We like competition, and we take the challenge.
I mentioned in the opening remarks the Panama Canal. Do you envision the congestion issue getting worse, or will it improve? We project that probably by 2030, only 50% of the LNG from the United States will use the canal, which is very good for shipping longer distances. Comments, please, Mr. Procopiou.
I believe that a large portion of transportation will be affected on the spot market, spot trade. And I believe that for the charterer or the producer or the trader, he would like flexible ships that can be accommodated at all ports, and he will sell where the price is best. So I do believe that as the VLCC market was evolved, we'll see a similar involvement in LNG sector, and these long-term relationships will exist, but every fleet will have a spot portion to deal and serve the traders and the producers.
Mr. Livanos.
Referring back to the canal. Well, there's obviously an upper limit to the number of ships that can transit the canal. I'm quite sure that the Panama Canal authorities will look to be maximizing their revenues, and so the vessels that are willing to pay the highest fees for transiting the canal will get the priority. So as the global fleet of LNG expands, and as we see more, hopefully more cargoes taking the Far East as a destination, it's inevitable, I agree with you, it's inevitable that the congestion in the canal will increase, and that there will be a limited number of ships that will be able to transit the canal. If I were a LNG charterer, I wouldn't run my numbers on the 100% assumption that you'll be able to get the ship through the canal on every voyage.
Well, the canal is already congested, and it looks like it's an outdated seaway. It looks like with Sabine Pass only in existence, and another 2 terminals coming in production next year, Freeport and Cameron, and probably a few more during the next 3 years in the United States. What shall we do with the existing canal? I think it's going to create either huge congestion or long ton miles to take the product from the Gulf to the east via the one cape or the other cape. So I think it's good for us that we have this kind of congestion, and we should be grateful.
Thank you, Mr. Angelicoussis, for that optimism. Now it's your turn, Mr. Wiernicki. We went from steam, tri-fuel, now MEGI or XDF. You know, many owners that are in this sector that got in early took a huge technology risk. Have we now reached the limit? Do we think the current ships are going to be around 10, 15, 20 years from now?
Michael, that's a great question. You know, technology in this sector is very much a commercial enabler. And you can see you can actually map the commercial evolution relative to the cargo with the technology to support that. The last 10 years in this sector, there has been significant catch-up, almost similar to what we saw in the 70s with other marine sectors. You have big changes in propulsion systems, propulsion system technology, optimized hull forms, moving from independent tanks to fully integrated tanks using membrane technology. And all these traditional kind of naval architectural technology changes have had a huge impact on vessel performance, improved fuel consumption. And if you look back at the history of LNG, and you look back from 1975 to, let's say, 2005, okay, nothing changed. We've talked about that. They're basically floating, ships were essentially floating LNG pipelines. Then you saw a big uptake with a greater focus on ship efficiency driven by these technology enhancements. Now you look at 2000, let's say between 2005 and 2015. Now you look at 2015 to 2018. Again, technology is there, but technology is that tool that is allowing us to find the right balance between cargo maximization and ship efficiency. You're seeing much more activity now in the last several years on looking at the right combination of active and passive measures to manage boil-off, to improve fuel consumption and improve cargo maximization. But I think going forward, if you look at where we are now and you look at going forward, there's been a lot of work done, and I think that the traditional kind of naval architectural technology advances have really been optimized. Okay, you're going to get a little bit more on power system improvements, you get probably a little bit more on trying to continue to push the boil-off rate down. But for most part, I think, in many ways, there's been a tremendous amount of work done, and therefore, I would expect going forward, you'd see technology changes being somewhat incremental, similar to actually what we would see in tankers and bulk carriers. In fact, it was very interesting. I think the next big technology improvement is actually going to be in how digital technology is actually applied in terms of improving reliability, data capture, data analytics to improve vessel performance, improve fuel consumption. So I think there may be some big gains there, but when I look at kind of the traditional naval architecture-driven technology, I think we've done quite a lot of heavy lifting over the last 10 years, and I think going forward, the system has been pretty much optimized.
So we're not going to see major game changes?
No, sir.
Okay. What about boil-off? Does anybody have any comments about Mr. Angelos?
The only comment I'd like to make to Chris's comments is that LNG was an antiquated industry. Until 2005, we had steam. What other industry, shipping industry, has used steam this century? If you come to think about it, it's the most traditional industry I have seen. But one can talk for a long time about technology. I think we have reached a plateau in any case.
Good. Boil off. Mr. Wiernicki, how low can it go?
Well, you track it. It's gone from 0.25 to 0.15 to, I think now we're looking at 0.08. And again, managing boil-off in many ways is very much driven by the commercial model relative to how do you what is the right balance between ship efficiency and cargo maximization. If you go back in history, the natural boil-off speed for steam was, I think it was 12 knots. I think for DFDEs it was 18. Now with larger vessels, larger tank sizes, greater focus on fuel consumption, the greater flexibility in the trading portfolio, you're looking for that right combination between passive boil-off measures relative to insulation and material. Active ones now are coming with respect to reliquefaction plants to begin to drive that, natural boil-off speed down to somewhere around 15 knots. I think, can you get lower than 0.08? Sure you can, but it becomes a CapEx, OpEx decision relative to, and I'm sure there are a lot of other materials out there. Right now I believe the insulation thickness is about 500 millimeters. If you increase the insulation thickness, you actually have to you begin to change the whole ship design. So that's one way to get lower boil-off rates. Otherwise, you're looking for innovative material and other increases with reliquefaction, but that becomes CapEx opposite. I actually believe that 0.08 is pretty close to where we are. We may be able to push it down a little bit more, again, incrementally, but I'm not so sure you can get down to, for example, 0.03, another 100% or 0.04, 100% improvement.
I believe that the big distance is already covered in boil-off, but everything depends also on the value of the cargo. It is different when you have boil off at a cargo at $20 per MMBTU, and it's different if it is $4 of MMBTU. So, but I do believe that the turbine ships, the modern turbine ships that we have built 3 of them, because this was the going design at that time of 150,000 cubic meters, we find a lot of good business for them, because there are always trades that because of distance, because of circumstances, fits better and can be competitive because of duration, required speed, availability of and price of the cargo. So what I can say that the ships that are coming off the long time charters that they are expiring, these they will go to the spot market, and the ships that are being built, they'll be committed for the longer term market. So we see this shift, but still we have not seen vessels even 40 years old to go for scrap. And this is still a feature of this industry. Storage, FSRU modifications, a lot of things are happening. And this also creates a very challenging competition for dealing with such projects with new buildings. So still on an expanding market as it is LNG market, all ships have a role to play.
Okay. I'm going to come back to that question in a second because you've taken a question away from me. But basically on your answer, Mr. Wiernicki, you feel that if there's going to be marginal technological improvement, then in your opinion, a 7-year charter is not necessarily what someone would want. They can go 10, they can go 15, they can go 20.
That's correct. That's
Good.
correct.
I'm happy to hear. Now, the big question, MEGI or XDF? Mr. Angelicoussis.
Obviously, we prefer MEGI because all our new builds are MEGI. However, we have retained the right to convert those that we have still time and the options we have into XDF if the charterer requires, and we can operate that as well. If I go by numbers, obviously MEGI are probably 3 times more than XDF. I'm not a technical man like Mr. Procopiou, for example, or Chris Wiernicki, but I prefer MEGI. It is cheaper to operate for the same capex. The consumption is lower in terms of fuel by 8 or 9%, and gas probably by 3%. And in addition to that, it is more cheaply compliable to Tier 3, which I think we are going to need sooner or later.
Now, let the lightning strike. Mr. Livanos.
We've taken a completely different view.
Maybe I'm wrong, Peter. I accept I could be wrong.
No.
The numbers have been given to me by your technical department.
Who's sitting right there?
I'll fire them then.
However, a bit like Betamax and VHS, I believe both technologies can and should live alongside each other. The MEGI design has predated the XDF design, so inevitably it was the early adopter's choice. There's no doubt that as an early adopter, it has suffered some initial teething troubles, which I believe inevitably XDF will also suffer. The real key issue for me when I distill this down, is around a safety issue that I find critical, and that is that in the MEGI design, you're putting very high-pressure gas into the engine room space. In the XDF design, you're just putting high-pressure gas in. It's not low pressure, it's high pressure, but not very high pressure. And I worry about the safety impact of having such systems on ships as they age, as they get used, and the implications that may have on the well-being of the crews of those vessels. That for me is one of the things that pushes me away. So I may have a slightly less competitive advantage in terms of consumption, but I certainly do feel like I'm taking a better choice for the people who are working on my ships.
If I only can add, Michael, first of all, they are the two foremost technologies today. It's too early for pronouncement of to have a verdict which is the best of the two. It depends on the operator. Operators of such high excellence like your company and our company, I think, could operate both. There is no question. Now, the reputation, bad reputation rather, for some of probably MEGI vessels, I don't know about XTF, was given by the wrong operators.
It's a very good point, and a very important point. And I think it reinforces your choice, and it also reinforces my words, because if you have a second-tier operator come into the market and try to take the challenges
Absolutely.
Of what you're doing with MEGI, they could risk lives on ships, which would have a negative impact on all of us who run ships well.
Absolutely. The point is we try to trade off this extra effort for lower consumption, lower operating expenses, or whatever else.
Mr. Procopiou.
I do believe, in plain words, it is a challenge to have 300 bars in the engine room instead of 30, 35, but all boils down on the makers and the crew on board. But every ship that is being built is a little bit better than the previous one. So the industry is proceeding with the help of the classification societies and the makers of the engines to a direction for safer ships. So yes, there is a challenge, but always we are used to challenges and we have no alternative but to test them and see also the economical bottom line where is best to otherwise in our we believe both are good solutions.
Now, Mr. Wiernicki, I know you're not going to choose one over the other, but any comments, please? Sure.
Listen, both. It is good to have two competitors in the market. I think that is good. That is a good thing, and we're very fortunate to have two competitors. Both the engines are certified, they meet class requirements. Okay, as we've talked about, there are pros and cons, and it's a function of a lot of different things relative to, to the owner's appetite and what they're looking for as they use those selections to, to optimize their performance. I think it's too early to tell. I think that the one thing that I would personally be very interested in looking at as we provide more time in the saddle with both these engines is the reliability, because they haven't been, none of them have been really out there for, we see a lot. By the way, they're both being ordered about the equal right now, and it's not just for LNG carriers, but it is also for vessels that are using LNG as a fuel. So those are the only other comments I could add. I think I probably more or less in some way or shape just duplicated what these guys have said.
Just to add on a bit to what Mr. Procopiou said about a two-tiered market. right? What you said basically is that we're going to have, as the term charters that are now in place get redelivered, the ships get redelivered, they go into the spot market. However, do you feel that this two-tiered market could last? Because many trades, I would prefer using a steam vessel, shorter trades, that doesn't make that much of a difference. So can there be a long-term market for the ships that are 10 years and older?
Definitely, definitely. And we have renewed for 7 or 10 years ships that are already 10 years old with other charterers and not the same. But what is interesting is that not yet a second-hand market has been really evolved in LNG ships. You don't have a steady second-hand market to see your asset being able to be flipped on or to buy. So all these were financial deals, what happened so far, with oil majors giving their older ships and taking them back as an incentive that they put off their balance sheet. So the next development, I believe, is the establishment of a second-hand market with those vessels. But definitely the returns, nobody knows if they will be better or worse than the long-term employment, because it depends very much on the condition that the LNG market would be. For instance, demand in China from last year to this year, 50% up, and still not enough. So I really, the future is never easy to tell.
Mr. Livanos.
I'd like to answer the question that I would ask myself, if you don't mind, on the two-tier market. The impeccable safety record of this industry has been down to the fact that both the suppliers of the service, the ship owners, and the end users of the service have put a very, very high degree of importance on reliability in terms of the operational delivery of the cargoes and the safety around it. That we have yet to see the LNG version of Exxon Valdez. And as this market continues to fragment further, I'm quite sure that we will see it. And that will be a watershed moment. That will be the moment when people reaffirm the need for impeccable operating credentials around this very tricky cargo. And that will be the moment when we see either a two-tier market or perhaps a return to the value added that should and has been given here today to operational effectiveness.
Mr. Angelicoussis.
There is no doubt that we have not seen the modern vessels grow in age to see if there is a two-tier market or whatever. The spot market, the development of the spot market will create, I think, more of a second-hand S&P market and probably a two-tier market. One thing I have learned is that every vessel has its use. In a good market, every vessel finds business and charterers can find some good features to take her. In a bad market, most vessels don't find business, period.
Okay. Mr. Procopiou, this, I think, is directed toward you specifically. There have been a lot of additional technological breakthroughs, such as the construction of ice-class vessels that can transit the northern sea route in the Arctic Circle, especially during the summer, right? Do you see a growth for such niche technologies
First of all, we have to differentiate the ice class and ice class. Ice class 1A, it is 50 centimeters thick ice, and Arctic 7 is 2.5 meters of ice, which it is broken by the ship itself. So it is a huge differentiation, and we have 3 azipods of 17,000 kilowatts each, and the ship is turning and is milling the ice. So it is things that we would never imagine that could happen. So definitely, before you were talking about Panama Canal, but we are shortening the distance by 50% going through the pole. So these are game changers. The reason that we have entered in this field is the observation that these ice-bound areas, they are very rich in natural gas, so there will be a production of LNG. And this happened, and we have seen that the Yamal is producing Yamal number 1 and Yamal number 2 together with Sakhalin. They want to reach the level of Qatar today, 70 million tons from Arctic regions. So there is a challenging, and the technology is developing very fast, and with tremendous impressive features that you have on those vessels. And the sea is very wide and has room for everybody. So there is no exclusivities or proprietary regions. Competition, as I said before, is synonymous to progress, and progress will never stop.
Mr. Livanos, an order for some ice-class vessels?
Global warming, Michael? I rest my case.
Mr. Angel, any comment?
To be honest with you, I have not considered it, but it would not be impossible. Obviously, it's something to stay. Russia, I think, is considering replicating Yamal in other areas in the North Pole. As far as I'm concerned, this is a big area. Can you say I'll never do business with Qatar? No. We have to be prepared to do business where business is. If it is icebreaker LNGs, we'll have icebreaker LNGs. Now, can we compete with Georgia? That's another story.
Any comment, Mr. Wiernicki?
Yeah, I was just going to add. It's just another example of technology as enabler to support a commercial strategy. You know, our gas comes from 3 parts of the world: from the north, from the U.S. and from Qatar. And you know, every area has its has its competitive advantage. The question is how to use technology to maximize it. In the case of Yamal, it is using icebreaker technology and polar technology to get through a relatively difficult environment, but yet it is a shorter environment commercially. So it's just technologies at play. If we can put a man on the moon, I am absolutely sure we can work through these technology issues.
I would be very happy to have a competition, but I do believe Mr. Livanos' observation for global warming has definitely merits, and the season is extending, and definitely there are cases that you might say this investment, which is almost double of an ordinary LNG carrier, if it's worth making. So yes, there are always challenges, nothing is easy. And as I cannot compete with Mr. Angelicoussis in what he is doing, I think this is a reply.
LNG, its use as a marine fuel. Given the IMO decision about the sulfur cap by 2020, how quickly do you feel that LNG will grow as a bunker fuel?
I came a little bit late, and I'm sorry about keeping you late, because I had Mr. Lim Kitak on the other panel, and I had the chance to say about the huge hypocrisy that is around this issue. So I will repeat this here, because I believe the more we hear, the better it is. If we care about pollution, it is not to create the pollution, not where we'll dump the pollution. So the pollution is created by the engines. The engine builders have to have the task to make less, to build and design less polluting engines. We are not asking the truck driver or the taxi driver to improve his car. We are asking the car manufacturers to meet certain criteria. This is the first point. The second point is there are three alternatives. One is special fuels with low sulfur. The second is scrubbers. And the third is the Columbus egg, reduction of speed reduction. But with speed reduction, nobody makes money. So that's why it is not promoted. With speed reduction from tomorrow, you cut the emissions by as much as you want. And with 2 knots, you are below the threshold that they are trying now to do it. And the ones that, because of their trade, because I've heard that they want to go fast and so on, they have to pay for the excess pollution that they create, depending on their engine, on the green fund. And a more a less aggressive approach, all three available methods in parallel. The ones that they opt for scrubbers, they install scrubbers. The one they want them to use fuels with 0.5, they use these ones if available. And the ones that they want to go slow, and these ones, they will really reduce the pollution in the globe. The other solution is dumping from the air to the sea and eventually to the fish, and then we'll eat it. Thank you. Mr.
Livanos. No, I think it's inevitable that LNG becomes the primary source of fuel for marine transportation. I think it's inevitable. In terms of timing, there are two issues that the industry is going to have to address. The primary being infrastructure. The lack of LNG infrastructure today, I think, is acting as a brake against an early adoption of the commodity as a marine fuel. But that should accelerate. And then there's the inevitable life cycle of the existing assets, and to what extent you replace the existing assets with new assets with LNG ready or LNG capable engines. It's coming, and it's coming. It is, the train has left the station, and there is no stopping it. LNG will dominate marine fuels, Mike.
I fully agree.
I agree with that, except that, as Peter said, we cannot find yet bunkering stations for LNG. So you need a dual fuel vessel, which is quite expensive. I would say prohibitively expensive right now. Even the smaller vessels are. Definitely, LNG is much cleaner than any other hydrocarbon, but it's still a hydrocarbon. And we must not forget that. Scrubbers is a temporary technology, and if one wants to be absolutely open, it's a method of meeting the regulations and at the same time making some money. And I am adopting scrubbers because I'm here in the business of trying to make money.
No kidding. Mr. Wiernicki.
I agree. Listen, LNG as a fuel, it is a very viable option. It will probably be the most sustainable option going forward. You know, we've seen it right now. If you look, I was looking at some data. There are 119 LNG fueled vessels in service. Most of those are actually short sea shipping vessels right now, obviously because of the infrastructure challenges. But when you look at the order book, there's 140, I think, on order. 70% of those are actually deep sea or kind of blue water vessels. There's a lot of very, very well thought out designs here in Greece. Project Forward. It is a very well thought out design. Listen, when you're designing for an LNG fueled vessel, it's a little bit more, it adds a little bit of extra dimension of complexity because you've got to worry about the design. You do have all the abilities to look at different engine systems, different containment systems, but you still, there is a little bit more complexity going forward, but it is in the realm of being very real. There are some charters that may be behind this. The infrastructure is getting better. There is a lot of work being done in the U.S., in Singapore, in Rotterdam. The regulatory framework actually is in place. So that has worked its way up with the IGS code. And it is, you know, we just have to watch this adoption rate. It's really the two big things from my mind. I'm not a ship owner. It's the bunkering infrastructure, and it is the cost of LNG that over time I think will work its way out. But it is, but we see that in play right now. As a very real.
If I may add,
yes, please.
If I may add, what Mr. Wiernicki said is also the differentiation in value on MMBTU basis. Today, LNG is at least 50% cheaper. It depends very much to see how oil will evolve, because price of oil 1.5 years ago was $25 per barrel, 30. Now went to 80. So to compare, because definitely the world goes to the cheapest possible energy source. Of course, LNG is a transitional fuel between hydrocarbons and question mark. I don't know what is next, but this will be the transitional fuel.
Let's turn to shipyards and the order book. Right now, there are currently around 90 conventional LNG carriers on order, and that excludes FSRUs and FLNGs and small-scale vessels. And in the first quarter, I don't know the actual statistics, but they report that 18 new building orders have been placed. That's approximately 20% of the fleet. Supply projects are always late. Ships are on time. Can the LNG trade, the supply actually grow fast enough to absorb all these vessels? We'll start in a rotation. Mr. Angelicoussis, go ahead.
I think the trade is growing already fast enough.
Agreed.
Especially the spot trade. And by the time these vessels are going to be delivered, because those ordered now are going to be delivered probably second half 20, if that. By the time the vessels will be delivered, there is going to be substantially more LNG trade than we see today. In any case, some of them have been ordered by established owners with a good track record on finding business for period with charterers. I think we must not dismiss all these vessels Michael, this way. It's, I like to hope that we have those vessels we have ordered, and we have ordered a few, I must admit, are going to find business. I am not planning to trade them in the spot market.
Only 16 vessels, let me just comment before I come to, just to add more dimension to it. 16 of those vessels have yet to be fixed. All right. The question is, will they be fixed, as you just said, prior to delivery? Vito, why don't you comment on Mr.
I think you would be, foolish to assume that the supply of ships cannot keep up with the ultimate demand of the ships from the increase in LNG production, which is very exciting and I think is ongoing.
That's a great story.
The issue we've faced, and the issue we've faced over the last couple of hiccups that we've had in this sector, is that we've had, as you pointed out, very reliable delivery of supply of ships, and we've had a very reliable delay of projects. And so the gap continues to be there, and we're looking now at a period where there has been very little capital allocated towards new LNG projects. So we have clear line of sight of the amount of LNG production that's coming on stream in the next 2, 3, 4 years, and not much line of sight of the next investment cycle. That investment cycle, I believe, is going to cause another imbalance in shipping, in which we will find there will be an exciting outlook on the demand of gas. There'll be a world struggling to find more of it and consume more of it. Plenty of ships to carry it, and not enough projects on stream to supply those ships with gas to carry to the people who want to use them. This is the gap that worries me, and this is the gap that I believe that people who are looking today at shipping are taking a very short-term view and saying, next 3, 4 years looks good. These are 30-year assets. These are not 5, 7-year assets. If you're going to make an investment decision for 30 years, you better have a business model that sustains that ship for the 30-year period, and not go into it thinking, well, I'll figure it out in 5.
What Peter says is very correct, I think. The problem is that charterers always use one of those cheap vessels to drop the rate, and one of those days they'll realize it's not the best way to do it. When we charter a vessel to somebody, it's a bit more than the rate. We offer services which are a lot better than most others can offer. I don't know if with all the projects which are coming, and that's a fact, whether they come in 20, 21 or 22, they are going to be there. For 3.5 years, nothing has happened in terms of new projects. They are put on ice. I think that the supply of LNG will be there. The gas demand is there. There is no question about that. Now, if there is a mismatch for a period, I accept. There might be. I don't think it's going to be a very long one. And I think more vessels will be needed than we believe at the end.
Mr. Procopiou?
I'm not so optimistic. I believe that the infrastructure is going with less speed for various reasons. However, the more and more destinations are available and the ton mile is increasing, so there we have the excess tonnage is absorbed. But definitely I would not be feeling very comfortable in ordering vessels without having at least a target for employment and some initial discussions. The balance is coming closer. Of course, the second wave of terminals and so on will be coming eventually, but the way that the world is now and the animosity between the various big players, you see United States, Russia, China, there is not a very smooth, even Qatar situation to be very optimistic that the production will have a leap and we'll need ships, very many ships. Already there are plenty. And this is the same in all sectors and applies the same principle that the world is realigning again the whole balances, and this is creating for investment a very bad outlook.
If only I could say, I don't know why we think, obviously I'm the most optimistic of the three of us, but why do we say that there are plenty of vessels in the spot market right now? Last year, rates spiked to double their level of this time of the year, and this time of the year is not all too bad. I think the rates in the winter time might be higher than last winter. So vessels disappear, whether we like it or not. There is not such a big, oversupply of vessels. I don't see it. It is going to be coming, but older vessels are leaving as well. They'll have to leave.
20% is not a small percentage.
I'm sorry?
20% is not a small percentage that are on order and to be delivered. 20% of the existing tonnage.
But some of them are committed to projects already.
Yes, but absorbs a new supply of commodity. This is... Anyway, nobody can predict the future. I like to be optimistic, and I take courage from you, John.
Could I ask, we have to move on. Yard new building prices, they seem to be rising slowly. Do you expect these yard prices to continue to rise? And if so, how quickly? Mr. Procopiou, let's start with you.
Prices in shipyards for all type of vessels are climbing. Why they're climbing? Steel price is climbing, has doubled almost from last year, 50-60% up. And exchange rate with a dollar parity in all shipbuilding nations is very much against the dollar. The local currencies are appreciating. So we see for ordinary vessels that they are asking 10% higher than what used to be on the bottom. And it's not a secret that all the graphs point upwards regarding new building prices. Now, LNG carriers are not many yards that are capable to build them. In China, which is the big competition, is for the moment just one shipyard, is Hudong, which is fully booked. We have there 2 FSRUs that are under construction. And we see that if you want to place an order, you'll be to 2023 and onwards, 24. So that the other Japanese are taking care for their domestic clients, and their capacity is very low. So remains the big 3. So the big 3, they have lost so much money, and they belong to the banks, except I believe Samsung not yet, but it is about. So they are prohibited by their governments to underwrite business at a loss. They are very much, in the past they were not so great scrutiny, Also, the finance, it is not as easy as used to be, even with the export agencies. The Chinese are the game changer, even if you don't build in China. So all this gives the room for hikes in the price. Now, if this is something to remain, I don't know. But for the time being, there is a hike in the price. Do you agree?
I do agree. Do you want me to comment?
Yes, please.
Look, I think shipyards are a socioeconomic experiment. The governments support shipyards through the banking system or through direct subsidy in order to maximize the employment levels that they have. And we saw massive employment around the Korean yards. Those of us that have been in shipping and went through the boom in the 70s watched the Japanese increase their shipbuilding capabilities to unbelievable proportions. They were building ships in places in Japan that should never even have thought about it. And when the collapse finally came, the government took the view that they were going to somewhat control the subsidies that were being applied to shipbuilding, and they brought shipbuilding under control. I think the Koreans will go through that process now. It's been billions and billions of dollars of subsidy, and from the perspective of the Korean treasury, it's been billions and billions of dollars of subsidy to get ships into the hands of foreigners, not even for their own country. The Chinese, on the other hand, have a completely different incentive. They are the net importers of the largest proportion of bulk commodities and the net exporters of the largest proportion of completed commodities, whether that be iron ore, coal, oil, etc. And so I could well imagine that the Chinese take a view that it's in their national interest to keep freight low, consequently keeping the supply-demand balance of ships in the favor of low freights and high supply, which would then allow their shipyards to prosper through their subsidies financed by their banks and help with their own unemployment. So whereas I see the Koreans have been through a reawakening of financial reality, the Chinese may yet go through that. Short answer, will shipyard prices rise? I think in the short term they will. Can we count on continued sustained rises in shipbuilding prices? I think the answer is no.
Well, I echo mostly the previous comments. I think yard prices are going to rise for many reasons. Skilled labor is disappeared in the 3 major Korean yards, and as such, it's difficult to bring it back. I don't say that we will not be able to find slots. We will, but they will be more expensive. How expensive, I cannot say. One thing we must not overlook, that in Korea, which is the main LNG builder in the world, the prices we have seen at some point during this half of the year were ridiculous. I mean, they were the prices we were paying for steam vessels in 2004. And I would say even lower than that. And we are talking about mega vessels with a lot more complex specification and all that. These prices were ridiculous. They have to go up. What's a proper price? I have no idea. I would say it's over 200 million, if you want my opinion, this time next year. I'm prepared to bet on that.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody taking the bet? Mr. Wiernicki.
I would certainly say shipyard prices are going to naturally increase, just like what George said. You've got exchange rates, you got price of steel, you even got vendor equipment that is going to be into that. Over the last 3 years or so, you know, over 50% of shipyard capacity has been taken out of the market. Now, when you look at the LNG space and you look at, you know, we talked prior about these inflection points, whether we have too many ships, not enough ships. You know, 3 years ago, we we would have said 2017 was an inflection point. Now we're looking at maybe 2020, where you'll kind of recorrect the supply and demand imbalance. But when you look at what you have in the yards right now, Korea can probably push out somewhere around 35, 40 ships a year. Japan can, China with 1 yard, maybe 4. Japan, okay, maybe 10. So you're talking about 50, 60 ships a year. Now the wild card, to be honest with you, is where are these ethane carriers going, because there are some pretty significant discussions about ethane carriers being ordered in large amounts, which could have an impact, quite frankly, on yards capacity and being able to kind of be there. But I think I, in general, agree with everybody here from kind of the view that from where I sit.
The ethylene carriers will be able to carry also LNG.
Yes.
This is the fear.
Yeah, that's right.
Historically, LNG was a small club. Relationships mattered. Performance mattered. It's getting larger and larger, and as it grows, will it really matter? Safety, as you said before, performance, service, will that really matter to charterers? And are they willing to pay for it? Mr. Procopiou, we'll start with you.
Always relation matters, because we are human beings. So we cannot exclude that. But less and less because of other considerations. Now, reliability and the record and service is of paramount importance, and they don't risk for any not proven operator easily, and that's why we discussed this surprise move by one major company. That was a really surprise. But it looks that this type of surprises are going to be around and in the future.
Mr. Livanos.
I agree with George. Relationships always matter because we are humans and we are people. I think that this world we live in is becoming more aware of itself, both environmentally and socially. And so the value that we put on human life is increasing on an annual basis, and has been increasing on an annual basis for a long time. So as you look at the value creation when you provide a service to an end user, that person must necessarily be looking at the value of human life, safety, reliability as it measures going forward. So to achieve that, you have to have a close relationship. You have to have a very close working relationship. It isn't a one-way street. You don't just come in and supply a service and leave. It's a dialogue and an interaction. So I'm still optimistic that the development of those relationships, the perseverance in high values, particularly towards safety and human life, are in the long term going to be valued by society and consequently in demand.
I entirely agree with that, and I have a feeling we are experiencing a short-term period where sometimes relationships don't matter or appear not to matter too much. At the end of the day, I think they matter, and they know the value we can add, this small club, to their balance sheet, the gas companies. I don't want to say that the charter rate does not matter. It matters. But we can offer a lot more than charter to them. And if they exploit and utilize us correctly, we can optimize their trading a lot.
Can I say one thing?
Yes, of course.
And John, I would piggyback on that and echo and say that data, the ability to use data to optimize performance, improve fuel consumption, reduce the charter cost, will be a more stronger link between owners and charters going forward, and maybe more than we've ever seen before, to be able to use that data collectively that they are pulling off your ships right now, to be able to redefine that relationship.
Chris, already the LNG sector was very much advanced and is in data and all this IT and computerization. So we see the benefits, and we are well ahead from the rest of the industry in this respect. So yes, we agree that big data that are coming will give other clues, but it will not be a game changer in LNG market.
As the LNG fleet continues to grow, will the industry be able to train enough seafarers to safely crew the expansion? And what steps have you taken in this regard, Mr. Angelicoussis?
Well, I suspect that's the collective biggest problem of the industry today. To find good people, train good people, and retain good people is very difficult, and particularly with the onerous matrices of the charterers, we have to retain as big a percentage as we can. Our retention rate is over 90%, and still we are facing problems with charterers' matrices. We try to train them through simulators in our new training center, and we are giving them on-the-job training by using double crews for a lot of ranks on the vessel. We are having special compensation packages for certain ranks, and we have special insurance for their families, for all of them. I must say the cost must be close to 50% of our OPEX today, if not 50%. And yet we still face a problem.
Mr. Livanos.
People matter more than anything. And in this industry, that's particularly true because of the sensitive nature of the cargo. There's no magic to it. The methods that Mr. Angelicoussis has employed around his own personnel and HR needs are the very similar methods and the same methods that we also do. We are all striving to achieve the same training levels, the same retention levels, and the same benefit levels. To answer your question, will there be sufficient crews available for these ships? I think the answer is yes. There will be various qualities there, and it'll be up to the more established operators and owners of ships to be selective about the people that they bring on board for the ships that they're adding to their fleet.
Mr. Procopiou.
The best investment is on training. We invest as much as we can absorb in training. The retention and the loyalty is very important, and it is not only the monetary incentives that you have to employ, to use. There are many other means to retain the crew, and especially to have the same people coming back on the same vessel or the sister vessel. So we have various schemes in place, and we are very happy with the outcome. And our contribution to the industry is to produce as many as possible trained people for LNG carriers. This is our contribution, and we do this with pleasure and happiness, and we don't get angry if somebody is picking up somebody of our people.
Now, the three of you operate your own vessels. other companies have chosen to use third parties. Do you believe it really makes a difference to charterers? Mr. Livanos.
Without question. Without question. It's probably the single largest differentiator between the three of us here is the fact that we've invested in our own internal systems and that we continue to drive their quality going forward. I have very, very little respect for someone who doesn't feel it's worth their while to run their own ships, whether it be in LNG or any other sector.
I entirely agree with you. It's our charterers say so, at least.
Yes, yes.
It is a must to run your own vessel.
But with all due respect for the three of you, the market doesn't seem to reflect that based on recent activity. Newcomers have come in, they've used third party, and it seems to be very, very acceptable to charterers.
Michael.
No, okay, I'm glad you started.
We have an accident and we kill someone. It's unbelievably costly, both morally and financially. And the only way you can legitimately guard against that is to take full responsibility for the way you run your assets. And to give that out to someone on a financial basis because they can do it cheaper, or to give it out to someone because you can't do it and they do it, so that's what gives you the right to own that asset, is irresponsible. Because at the end of the day, the accountability of having your own operations is fundamentally critical to the asset integrity that you maintain and use. So if a charter doesn't want to pay me for it, doesn't mean I'm not going to do it. That's the way we run our businesses. All three of us here run our business like that. We're not going to change us because the market will maybe pay us a little bit less, because at the end of the day, if there is an incident, it's our reputations that are at risk, and our reputations are not able to be recovered. Others don't care. They'll leave. They'll go away. And that's not right.
May I add something? Thank you, first of all, because you represent exactly our feelings. But as the English say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So I don't see any growth on those people that have done this method. So this is the proof.
And even,
have you seen any growth?
Our dear friend, Mr. Fredrickson, who has used that method in many of his shipping, in the LNG world, needed to bring it in-house and started to do that.
Okay.
You cannot grow otherwise.
I feel absolutely clear on that. We are very strong about not only having our own crews, but making them feel that they are employees of the company. Problems come every time, every now and then on a vessel. It's a great thing to have your own people. They are loyal to you and they work for you. And even charterers recognize that. They are proud to work for us, and they feel that they are doing a great service, not only to us, but to our charterers as well. And I think the newcomers that are using companies which I am not going to mention now, there is nothing I can do. They have no choice. Now, if you do it for cheapness, then they are dangerous for the collective industry.
And that's a big concern, because most of the growth for ship owners is the United States. But it's not only LNG coming out of a very, very small area. It's ethane, it's LPG, it's containers. And inevitably, there will be a problem. There are problems now. So hopefully what you've all said will pass through to charterers understanding that. But again, it's a matter of economics, I would imagine. You agree, Peter?
No.
No. Okay.
Macondo, we all sat and watched the oil spew out of the ground on that live feed. and we all watched the catastrophe that BP faced. And when the CEO of BP went in to sit with a group of investors, he was asked the question, tell me how much oil was down there. How much, you dug this hole in the ground, how much? He said it was a great well, it was a great find. He said there was between 1.7 and 2.2 billion dollars worth of oil there. To which his investor said to me, you mean to tell me, he said, you risked $7 to $8 billion on $2 billion of oil? He said it was a completely asymmetric risk. And shipping, unfortunately, has this asymmetric risk. The only way you can counteract that, the only way you can make it make sense over the long term is to make sure that when you're providing the service or doing the operation or running the ships or carrying the cargo, whether it be gas, which is very sensitive, or oil, that you're doing it at the highest standards you possibly can. Because when the accident finally happens, the risk is disproportionate to the very meager freight rates that this industry pays its owners.
Absolutely right.
Okay. Now let's turn to finance. How do you feel about, what's the difficulty in financing an LNG carrier with 5 or 7 year employment as compared to other vessels? Mr. Angelicoussis.
Well, obviously it's a bit more challenging than before, but we managed to do it. We have obviously the luxury of having a holding company, and we can hide a short fixture or no fixture at all in that. There is no doubt that both terms, rates, are not the same as they would be with a long-term fixture and loan-to-value, obviously. I would say that our bankers are educated, they know us for a long time, they trust us, and they lend more to the company and less to a vessel with or without a short period charter. We must not forget that big banks today want to deal primarily with few big companies and not just everybody. Luckily, we are in that group of companies.
Mr. Livanos.
The financing landscape, particularly for shipping, is becoming more challenging. Basel IV and IFRS 9, both the IFRS, which deals with the accounting side, and Basel IV, which leads with the credit side of the way banks have to look at and book these loans, is disadvantaging shipping per se. In the LNG space, this is further exacerbated by the fact that the asset is not very liquid. A bank repossessing an LNG ship is going to find itself in an awful predicament, both unable to trade it successfully and unable to sell it on to the next person, which is very different from the more commodity shipping such as bulk carriers and tankers. So I think we will see continued tightness in the financing market, and it will push people to alternative financing sources, whether that be the leasing, and particularly we've seen some Asian leasing coming into effect, or to a degree that it's possible, the secondary lending market or the bond markets.
Mr. Procopiou, any comments?
Definitely, the banking system is through reshaping. The European banks from 40, they're down to 5 active, if there are 5 active. American banks have retreated a lot. It is true that large companies, we can still find financing, and we can, but for somebody to start now, it is very difficult, especially in the LNG sector. I find challenging. But on the capital markets, what strikes me most, apart from the shrinking of the shipping enthusiasts for various reasons, that they cannot appreciate the long charter, the availability of long charter. The mindset of the investors is for the next 3 years. You have 3 years or you have 13 years is the same approach. So, response rather. So, I find it always it will be more challenging for any ship financing and especially for LNG carriers.
Just to stay on the same topic, when you finance, you have to make a residual value assumption. How would you feel about the life of a ship and its value?
Well, I think I say on the side of caution, and we use 30 years. But residual value is a funny game. You can make any project look good if you want by playing with residual value. If you want to fool yourself, you can fool yourself as much as you like. At the end of the day, Michael, we have to make money.
Yep. Mr. Livanos?
I think John gave the perfect answer. The residual value calculation is anything you want it to be. We've seen, we share the same conservative view, by the way, on 30 years.
I saw I heard the 30 years.
However, you, Michael, the other day told me that you've seen a ship that has been trading for 47 years.
The Shell ships, the Brunei ships, this last week, 2 of them went to the yards, scrap yards, and one traded for 44 and the other traded for 46 years.
Yeah. So I'm optimistic that if you have good asset integrity, you maintain your ships well, you have a good operations, you should be able to extend the value creation from the asset to the maximum period of time.
That's a bonus if we get it.
Yes.
Okay.
I agree with you.
This is a guesswork. This is a guesswork. It's just a fiction story that you have to put down.
Okay. Private versus public. Mr. Angelicoussis has remained private. Mr. Livanos has gone public, both with a listed company and an MLP. Mr. Procopiou has done an MLP. What are your comments? What are the advantages and disadvantages? Mr. Livanos going public.
A bit like Meggie and XDF, you can see pluses and minuses in both structures. The public structure that we chose to adopt was largely driven by the recognition of 2 things. One, that the capital commitment in terms of this particular sector and the expense of the assets was high, and at the same time, the need to have a strategic asset base rather than just existing with 1 or 2 assets was also quite high. So you have the combination of saying, look, if I'm going to get into this business, it doesn't work with 1 ship every now and again. You need to have a proper fleet, a properly run fleet, and that has requirements for extensive equity and extensive debt generation. The other thing that I recognized is that unlike the normal commodity shipping space, in which you can look at a cyclical market and say, yeah, maybe I'll buy 5 VLCCs this week, or maybe I'll sell 5 VLCCs this week. You simply can't do that in the LNG sector. So as an investor and as a guardian of family wealth in order to be able to take decisions where you may find that you're at a cyclical high or a cyclical low. The only way you can do that is by either advancing more money into the company through the public space or reducing it. All that being said, it's a nightmare. Running a public company comes with additional costs that are not small. It comes with additional regulatory obligations that are not simple. And I would say to you that whereas John probably spends 100% of his time thinking about what piece of business to do, I don't have the luxury of spending more than 75% of my time doing that. 25% of my time is focused on what the regulators want me to think about. And so that, in a nutshell, is how I see the two. However, I will just finalize and say, many people, unfortunately, in this country, have taken the public company view as a shortcut to wealth creation because they have assumed that the investor in the public space is uneducated, and they have tried to take advantage of it. And that is something that I find abhorrent in the way the public sector has been utilized in the shipping space.
Thank you. Mr. Angelicoussis, briefly.
As you know, I prefer the private model. It gives me freedom to do what I like, decide quickly. Our charterers like it a lot of times. If business is private and they want it kept private, non waste of time with road shows, shareholders meetings, demands, this, that, and the other. On the other hand, you can never say never. Who knows? It's a capital demanding industry, and one day I may decide to do that. I cannot say for sure that for the time being we cope.
Mr. Procopiou.
The answer was given. I'm in both.
Okay. Just a final question. Where do you see the LNG industry in 10 years? And where do you wish your company to be at that time? Mr. Angelicoussis, we start with you.
Okay, start with me. As you gathered, I'm the optimist of the group. Maybe that's why you should. I think that there is going to be a lot more production around the world. I know there is some friction among certain countries, but still, trade is trade. I can see the US, Russia, Qatar, Mozambique, and Iran, very probably within the next 10 years producing a lot. There is demand. Vessels will be needed. So, what can I say? I want to be there with a good company, very good operations, good relationships, existing and new ones if I can, and take advantage of this boom. I don't know if it's going to be very big or not. I think it's going to be great, a great time for us.
Mr. Livanos?
10 years. So that's 2028. I imagine that the commodity will have entered into a much broader appeal throughout the world and consequently will be traded in a much more flexible manner. I imagine that that will require the service providers, we in shipping are one, to be able to react to that. And so I can easily see that the ships that we're using today, although the technology may not change, the way they're used will change, and the way they look might change. Where do I want to be? I'd like to be at the forefront of it where I am today. I think that having spent 10 years understanding the industry before I put any capital at risk for my family, and now having been in it for another 10 years or so, I believe that being in an industry-leading position in an exciting growth industry is not a bad place to be at all, and that's where I'd like to be in 10 years.
Mr. Mr. Procopiou.
I believe that natural gas is going to conquer many other forms of energy, displacing coal, displacing gasoline, even as CNG will be more and more used in the automotive industry, creating less emissions. And I do believe that the foundations are here are put, and my family is fully committed. But I hope that after 10 years, I'll watch them from my boat far away.
And Mr. Wiernicki would like to class as many of the new ships as possible. Correct?
Sure. I actually would add that I think that 10 years from now, I think operational efficiency and scale will actually mean more then than it even does now.
Now, we have a few minutes for questions, but let me put things in perspective. Back, there was the same optimism many years ago at various conferences. At those times, they were Panhandleista, Columbia Gas. They were merged, bought. Why? Because they suffered, because the U.S. government simply deregulated gas. Okay? That could happen in other places. So what can go wrong before everyone goes out of this room and orders some ships? Supply projects could get delayed. We talked about that. Too many ships too soon. Renewables. Renewables are slowly getting there, competing. Certainly reduced demand for natural gas is on the horizon. Japan, the largest market for LNG. It could restart its nuclear plants. Right? Nuclear is the sunken cost. They have a big trade imbalance. Could they do it? We'll see. European LNG demand. Now, Russia and the EU made an agreement. Will Russia allow the United States to take over European demand? Just kill them off? I don't think so. And pipeline distribution is much cheaper, I can assure you. China gas demand. You know, China is, Russia's got pipelines being built from the north. Their biggest market is in the north for LNG. Pricing is very important. We still have a commodity called coal that's still around, and it depends on all these factors putting pressure on price. India, bureaucratic, subsidized. What happened in the United States in the 1980s? Regulations came off. They forced people to produce more of their own energy, and guess what? Prices went up and demand got destroyed. Could happen elsewhere. Politics. Can you predict what's going to happen with policy in the United States? I mean, it's anybody's guess. And we do have a history of changing things. Oil prices. 65% of the current LNG is sold linked to oil. Now that, they say, will be reduced with Henry Cub getting a greater piece. But still, that's a large percentage, and at $80 oil, you have $10 gas. At $50 oil, you have $6.25 gas. So the margins for ship owners will come down, or else the commodity will not move. Now, there's an argument that many of the costs in the United States are sunken, so the commodity will still move. But that cannot continue forever. Black swans. financial. What happens if Italy goes down? What happens if Spain follows? What happens to demand at that time? It can certainly slow progress, no doubt about it. And there are wild cards, things we cannot even think about today that could stop it. So before you rush out and order some ships, think about the past and think about some of the factors, although I do think it has a low probability and the future does look rosy. Questions? Where's a microphone, somebody? Handheld, there you go.
One comment I wanted to make,
Please.
Michael, on what you said, which I agree. In 1980s, environmentalism was not as important as it is today. So LNG is a lot more important than then. We must not forget that China, from being a huge importer and growing at this pace, could suddenly, I don't know if I could say disappear, but they have huge shale reserves. Could you answer me? What happens then if they develop them and they stop importing and become an exporter, for example?
Possible.
Well, look what happened to the United States.
Of course.
It was good for trade.
Correct. Question, please.
Thank you very much. Given that the IMO has agreed to ban, or at least to halve the amount of carbon from 2050, and LNG only reduces carbon emissions by about 15 to 20%, what will your next projects be? What will you move into?
Mr. Livanos, maybe you want to take a stab at that?
I'm going to be with George on the yacht.
You're very welcome.
I think we should do another question. Yes.
Thanks very much. We only heard one mention of Iran this afternoon. I would like to ask, we've already heard that Total is said it's intending to pull out of the development of South Pars, which, along with Qatar, is one of the biggest oil fields gas fields in the world. Do you expect in the medium term that the sanctions to have a material impact on the market? Thanks.
They have already had, it looks like, exports of oil have been reduced, not by that much yet, but they expect them to be reduced a lot. Total has decided to pull out, irrespective of what the French government says, because they have interest in the States. So they'll have a material effect on Iran in the short term. When I mentioned Iran, I mentioned it because I believe sooner or later there will be a solution.
Next question here, please.
Concerning crew, you talked about needing more training, more specialization, everything. What about nationalities? Which ones do you focus on retraining?
Mr. Procopiou.
We are international. We don't care about nationalities. Of course, would love to be all Greeks, but they are not available. So we mix nationalities, we mix cultures, provided they have a good command of English language. And we do believe that today we live in a multinational environment, and you see on the production fields, there are all nationalities as well. So it is not any focus on where they are coming from, but what they can do and how devoted and focused are, and they want to progress and learn. So for us, nationality is irrelevant, apart from Greeks that they have priority.
Anybody would care to comment on that further?
Peter, you want to speak? I mean, we have similar views, so it's okay.
I let you speak for me.
Okay. All our vessels are basically Greek flag. As such, we have to use quite a lot of Greek crew. We have also foreign crew, no question, and we have a couple of officer ranks which we cannot find in Greece, like gas engineers, electrical engineers are not that easy. But basically, we prefer Greeks and we find them more loyal and more capable of coping with an incident if an incident comes up. And there is always something on a vessel.
Okay. Please.
With all the liquefaction coming online, I'd like the panel to comment about the restrictions in China with respect to storage and the ability to receive all the gas.
As far as I understand, they have plenty empty, that because the gas was exhausted, and now they are trying pumping in the caverns and so on. So I'm not afraid about the capability of Chinese to find or to build, because they need to use their overcapacity in such fields. So they will build capacity for storages, or they use the exhausted caverns.
Maybe I can comment on that. Basically, Chinese demand is very seasonal, right? And as a result, this past winter they were caught, right? They needed all this gas all at once, and it caused a spike in the market. And they are now constructing both on land and underground storage, but that takes time. So the big question is, how long will it take before storage is built to avoid tremendous fluctuation in seasonality? Question? I see a hand back there.
You think methanol will be giving competition to LNG as a marine fuel?
Mr. Wiernicki.
It is a competitor, but as I understand it, methanol has a lower energy content than LNG in terms, and so therefore you have to factor that in. So it doesn't have as much, if I understand correctly, it doesn't have as much kind of energy capability relative to the conventional fuels. It's got a lower energy content.
It can happen, but it'll take a long time. And well, the same infrastructure problems go on and all the rest. Any other hands? Yep, please.
What are your views on the emergence of small and medium LNG carriers market? For the reasons of supporting small-scale LNG market development, you are titans of conventional LNG. Have you thought about diversifying your fleets with smaller vessels?
Mr. Livanos.
I think the emergence of small and medium-sized LNG vessels is both exciting and inevitable. Not only around the use of LNG as a bunker fuel and consequently the need for infrastructure around bunkering, but also the distribution of LNG in smaller parcels to smaller power projects. There will be, I believe, a very strong growth in that sector. We have as yet not seen anything more than the beginnings of it. I believe the Stolt-Nielsen Group is the first group to have started to look at that with some projects that they see in Sardinia. But it's inevitable that you'll see this group, and I can't speak directly, but I would imagine that this group would be part of the drive towards the smaller diversification in the LNG sector.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Please.
Thank you. You all mentioned that part of the commoditization of the LNG industry will be the creation of the second-hand market. How do you see this happening, and how will the bid-ask spread that was created by the evolution technology be breached?
I believe commercial realities always will prevail. So after the development of the more stable spot market, and where traders would want to cover their volumes with optional destinations, the easy result of that, consequence of that, is to charter on the spot market. Once this is developed, there will be even myself, I could start buying second-hand vessels to satisfy this demand with, but I believe also other tanker companies or newcomers will want to get in. And I do believe there the challenges will be again very great. But once overcome the operational challenges, it will be a similar market like the Suezmax or LR1s or LR2s. Okay. I'm convinced that this will happen.
Okay. You want to comment?
I believe that it will happen. I don't see it happening anytime soon. And when it does happen, I don't think there will be a bid-ask spread. A bid-ask spread. I think each deal will have its own profile, and it'll be very difficult to go and look at a mark-to-market on anything.
The bigger the LNG traded spot, the bigger amount, the more vessels traded spot, the more likely is to have an S&P, second-hand market. One problem which we have with LNGs is that quality matters. And it's not so easy to buy somebody else's LNG, which you don't know exactly how they have treated it, and expose yourself to risks if you fix her later to somebody. I think it's something we have not seen yet. I'm sure we'll see it in my lifetime, most probably, but it's still tricky.
Mr. Wiernicki is going to conclude the session.
A couple of comments as I kind of pull some of these thoughts together. First of all, I think what I have seen, I think what we've all concluded is LNG is definitely a growth industry over the next 10 years. And you're going to see it really, I think, become the fuel of choice relative to countries meeting their power demands. And along with that, I think LNG as a marine fuel will be a very viable and very real option going forward. Going back to the first question on technology, the traditional technology gains that we saw that were very dramatic over the last 10 years or so are going to slow down. I think it will not affect ordering going forward. I think you will see continued technology gains, and I think they'll be somewhere on the order of 20%, similar to what I think we see for what we see right now for tanker, bulk carrier, and even container ship effects. One thing we didn't talk a lot about is safety, and I think everyone on the panel would agree, safety is the mantra of the industry. It is really in many ways a competitive differentiator. One thing we didn't talk about, which is coming up and actually kind of gets into the wheelhouse of crews and the importance of crews and training, is the focus on cyber safety, especially when you're dealing with vessels like this that have so many sensors. Cyber-enabled physical systems are going to become more important. We as a classification organization are very interested in this because cyber and software are the safety systems you don't see. We can touch the hull, we can touch the machinery, we can open up the engine, but when you get to cyber, that is different. And I think that will be a challenge. It will affect crew training. It will affect kind of ship-to-shore communication. But I think that's very important going forward. From our point of view, you know, we talked about data and digital and so forth. It's a favorite topic of mine. I just would like to come back and say that, you know, kind of the speed and scope of how digital technology will move into shipping is still a little unclear, maybe a little bit longer horizon than possible. But I believe it is actually coming into the commercial supply process decision making. Even I think with LNG, you're seeing much more predictive vetting using data to take decisions, and obviously possibly the use of blockchain as you look at who your cargo is. Eventually, this will get to, I believe, a digital data ecosystem that will begin to affect and probably reliability of vessels, operational performance of vessels, could be kind of and we will see that from everything from, you know, I say cloud computing, but we didn't talk a lot about navigation, but you'll see a lot more object recognition sensor technology for navigations, especially as you get more LNG vessels coming, even in, you know, in the States coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. There'll be a lot more there, but I think you'll see that. And I think you'll see a lot more data-driven predictive maintenance. And even from a class point of view, you will see probably more condition-based class as we begin to move away from a calendar-based survey cycle to be able to support the needs of the owners here as they drive to maximize their commercial model. So
I think our panelists deserve a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and have a nice evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Michael. Terrific job.
I enjoyed that.
You did a great job.
And congratulations on